I did it for this family. His blood is not our blood. I would rather see her heartbroken today than our entire legacy ruined tomorrow.
I did it for this family, my daughter Eleanor hissed, her voice a low, venomous whisper that was more frightening than any shout. We were standing in the small, silent sacristy, the faint, joyful sounds of the organ filtering through the heavy oak door. His blood is not our blood. I would rather see her heartbroken today than our entire legacy ruined tomorrow. That was my daughter, my firstborn, willing to sacrifice her own child's happiness on the cold altar of her pride. The depth of her cruelty, revealed on that beautiful spring morning in Pelotas, is a memory that still chills me to the bone. Hello, my dear ones, and welcome back to Mother Mary's Memories. I am so glad you have joined me. Before we travel back to that fateful wedding day, please take a moment to press the like button and subscribe to my channel. And it would bring a smile to my old face if you would tell me in the comments which city you are listening from today. It makes our time together feel all the more special. Now, let us return to that morning. On my granddaughter's wedding day, I discovered my daughter's secret plan to destroy it. The day had started with such promise. The sun rose over our estate, casting a golden, hopeful light through the tall windows of the bridal suite. The air smelled of lilies, fresh coffee, and the faint, sweet scent of hairspray. My granddaughter Emily was a vision of nervous joy. Her laughter, light and infectious, was the only music we needed. She had already been through so much in her young life, and to see her standing on the precipice of such happiness filled my heart to bursting. Her fiancé, Marco, was a good man. Not a Vance, not from old money, but a kind, hard-working architect who adored Emily with a sincerity that was plain for all to see. He was the anchor she needed, and he loved her for who she was, not for her family name. My daughter Eleanor was the very picture of the proud, doting mother. She fluttered around the room, a whirlwind of perfectly coiffed hair and silk dressing gown, adjusting the train of the wedding dress, conferring with the makeup artist, and directing the bridesmaids with the authority of a seasoned general. She straightened Emily's veil with hands that seemed so gentle, cupping her daughter's face. "Perfect," Eleanor had said, her voice thick with what I mistook for maternal love. "Absolutely perfect, my darling." Looking back, I see the lie in her eyes, the cold calculation behind the warm smile. At the time, I only saw a mother fussing over her child. Eleanor's need for control was nothing new. She had spent her life managing people and situations to fit her pristine vision of how things ought to be. I simply believed that, for once, she had set aside her prejudices for the sake of her daughter's happiness. I was a fool. The first hint of trouble came an hour before we were due to leave for the church. Eleanor received a frantic call from the wedding planner about a supposed mix-up with the floral arrangements at the reception hall. With a dramatic sigh, she announced she had to go and handle it personally, as no one else could be trusted. In her contrived haste, she left her alligator skin handbag on a velvet armchair in the corner of the room. A few minutes later, as Emily was having her final touches of makeup applied, she winced. "Grandma," she whispered to me, "I have a dreadful headache. I think Mama has some of her strong headache powders in her purse. Could you possibly find them for me?" "Of course, my love," I said, patting her hand. Relieving her smallest discomfort was my only wish. I walked over to the armchair and picked up Eleanor's expensive, heavy bag. As I opened the clasp, I expected to find the usual contents: a wallet, lipstick, a small bottle of perfume. I rummaged past a silk wallet and a set of keys, searching for a small tin of medicine. My fingers brushed against a folded stack of papers. Thinking it might be a copy of her mother of the bride's speech, I drew them out, a fond smile on my face. Perhaps I would get a sneak preview, but it was not a speech. My blood ran cold. The pages were printouts of a text message conversation. My breath caught in my chest as I read the first few lines. The conversation was between Eleanor and an unknown number, a man she was clearly paying. Eleanor: "Is it done? Are the photographs convincing?" Unknown: "Crystal clear. He looks drunk." "She looks very friendly. You won't be disappointed." Eleanor: "They were delivered to Emily's apartment last night." Anonymously? Unknown: "Just as you instructed. Left in a plain envelope with the concierge. She will have them by now." The perfect little seed of doubt, planted the night before her wedding. My hands began to shake violently. I read on, my horror growing with every word. They spoke of Marco's bachelor party. Eleanor had hired a woman to approach him, to get close to him, to ensure a photographer captured misleading, compromising images. Then she had arranged for those photos to be sent to her own daughter, my Emily, the night before she was to pledge her life to this man. It was a plot of such calculated psychological cruelty that I could barely comprehend it. I suddenly understood the slight shadows under Emily's eyes that morning, the flicker of anxiety I had mistaken for simple wedding day nerves. Eleanor's plan had been to poison Emily's heart with suspicion, hoping that she would call the whole thing off in a fit of doubt and heartbreak. But Emily's love for Marco was stronger than Eleanor's poison. She had chosen to trust him. She was here, putting on her white dress, believing the best of the man she loved. I stood there, hidden in the corner of the sunlit room, holding the evidence of my daughter's treachery in my trembling hands. In the distance, I heard the first gentle chime of the church bells, a beautiful, haunting sound calling us to the ceremony. They were a countdown to a sacred vow, but for me, they were the ticking of a terrible clock, marking the few moments I had to make an impossible choice. Expose the lie and shatter this perfect day into a million shards of pain, or keep the secret and allow my beloved granddaughter to walk down the aisle unaware of the viper she called a mother. The crisp paper felt like poison against my fingertips. The distant church bells were no longer a joyful summons, but a ticking clock counting down to a catastrophe. In that sun-drenched room, surrounded by love and laughter, I had stumbled into a darkness so profound it threatened to swallow us all whole. My mind, usually so clear, became a maelstrom of impossible choices. Do I scream? Do I run out and show these vile pages to Emily, shattering her heart moments before she pledges it to another? The image of her face crumpling in despair, her wedding dress becoming a costume for a tragedy, was more than I could bear. The scandal would be immediate, explosive. A war would erupt right there, amidst the lilies and silk, and my granddaughter would be the first and most tragic casualty. Or do I choose silence? Do I fold these papers, slip them back into the belly of the beast that was my daughter's handbag, and pretend I had seen nothing? Could I sit in the front pew of the church, a silent accomplice to this grotesque manipulation? Could I watch Emily say her vows, her heart so full of pure love, knowing her own mother had tried to poison it? That silence felt like its own special kind of betrayal, a quiet, creeping rot. The door to the suite opened, and my heart seized in my chest. It was Eleanor, returned from her manufactured crisis, her face a perfect mask of maternal concern. "Everything is all right," she announced to the room, her voice smooth as cream. "A minor issue all handled. Emily, my love, are you ready? The car is waiting." Her eyes swept the room and landed on me, standing awkwardly in the corner by her chair. For a terrifying second, I thought she could see the truth in my face, that she knew I held her wretched heart in my hands. I instinctively closed my fingers around the papers, hiding them against my palm. "Mother, are you all right? You look pale," she said, her brow furrowed with false worry. The hypocrisy was so stunning, so complete, that it cleared my head. In that instant my choice was made. Not a permanent choice, not a decision about the final reckoning, but a choice about the next 5 minutes. My granddaughter was standing on the threshold of the happiest moment of her life. She had unknowingly fought off her mother's poison and chosen love. I would not be the one to reward her strength by destroying that moment. I would protect this day for her. The war with Eleanor could wait. The consequences would come, but they would come on my terms, after Emily was a wife. "Just a little overwhelmed with happiness, my dear," I said, my voice steady, a feat of will I did not know I possessed. "It's a grandmother's prerogative." I slipped the papers into the deep pocket of my dress jacket, an ember of evidence burning against my side. The journey to the church was a blur. I remember the scent of Emily's perfume in the car, the feel of her hand, cool and trembling slightly, in mine. "I'm so happy, Grandma," she whispered to me, and I squeezed her hand, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. The ceremony was the most beautiful and agonizing hour of my life. I watched Eleanor, seated beside me in the front pew, dab a single perfect tear from her eye as Emily walked down the aisle. She was a consummate actress. I felt a rage so cold and pure it almost frightened me. This was my child, my flesh and blood, and she was a stranger to me, a monster cloaked in designer silk. I watched Emily and Marco at the altar, their faces alight with a love so genuine it was like a physical force in the church. They said their vows, their voices clear and strong, promises of faith and trust and honor. Every word was a dagger in my heart, for I knew how close those very things had come to be in. I watched Emily and Marco at the altar, their faces alight with a love so genuine it was like a physical force in the church. They said their vows, their voices clear and strong, promises of faith and trust and honor. Every word was a dagger in my heart, for I knew how close those very things had come to being shattered by the woman sitting right next to me. When the priest pronounced them husband and wife, the church erupted in joyous applause. Confetti rained down as they walked back up the aisle, beaming, their future seemingly as bright and cloudless as the beautiful spring day. I stood, clapped and smiled, playing my part, the proud matriarch of a happy family. But as the crowd began to move, I caught my daughter's eye. Eleanor looked at me, a flicker of something, disappointment, frustration, in her expression, quickly replaced by a tight social smile. She thought her plan had failed, that Emily had simply ignored the photos, and that this was the end of it. She thought she had lost a battle but would continue the war in subtler ways. She was wrong. She did not know that the evidence of her betrayal was no longer anonymous. She did not know that it was safely in my possession. As her polite smile faltered, she must have seen something in my eyes, something that made her pause. It was not the shared joy of a mother and grandmother. It was not forgiveness, it was a promise of a reckoning. The wedding was over, and my war with my daughter had just begun. The reception was a beautiful lie. Held in a grand marquee on the lawns of our estate, it was a fantasy of twinkling lights, champagne fountains, and the lush scent of 1,000 white roses. The band played a soft bossa nova, and laughter echoed across the manicured gardens. To any outsider, we were the picture of familial bliss, a dynasty celebrating a perfect union. But I saw only the cracks in the porcelain, the rot beneath the gilding. The evidence in my pocket felt like a shard of ice against my skin. Every smile I offered felt like a betrayal. Every toast I raised felt like a curse. I watched my daughter, Eleanor, move through the crowd, a queen in her element. She accepted congratulations with a gracious smile, her posture perfect, her control absolute. She was magnificent in her deception. No one else saw the coldness in her eyes. No one else knew the poison she had tried to inject into this very day. Only I knew, and that knowledge changed everything. She approached me by the towering, 7-tiered wedding cake. Her smile as sweet and artificial as the spun sugar flowers that adorned it. "You've been so quiet, Mother," she murmured, her voice a silken thread of false concern. "I hope you're not feeling unwell." It was not a question of health. It was a probe, an attempt to understand the new, hard look in my eyes that had been unsettling her since the ceremony. I took a slow sip of my champagne, meeting her gaze over the rim of the glass. "On the contrary, Eleanor," I said, my voice deliberately soft, forcing her to lean closer. "I've never felt more clear-headed. I'm just seeing our family in a new light today. It's very illuminating." Her smile tightened by a fraction of an inch, the only sign that my words had struck their target. She was a master of control, but she could not control my thoughts, and the idea terrified her. "Well," she said briskly, turning away. "Emily is about to throw the bouquet. We should gather." My eyes followed her and then went to my granddaughter. Emily was radiant, her face flushed with happiness as she stood beside Marco. I watched him lean down and whisper something in her ear that made her laugh, a genuine, unburdened sound. He was a good man, the intended victim of my daughter's cruel ambition, and seeing him look at Emily with such adoration, all I felt was a fierce, protective fire. This man, whom Eleanor had deemed unworthy, was more worthy than any of us. He had earned my loyalty, not just as my grandson-in-law, but as a man of character. My other son, David, sidled up to me, a glass of whiskey in his hand. "Well, she pulled it off," he said with a cynical smirk. "Little Emily is finally married. Marco seems decent enough for a man with no family name to speak of. He certainly lucked out marrying into this." Before, I might have let the comment pass, another of David's casual cruelties. "Not today." My gaze snapped to his. "He is a fine man who loves her," I said, my voice leaving no room for argument. "It is we who are lucky to have him." "Do not forget that," David blinked, taken aback by my tone. He simply nodded and retreated back toward the bar. A small victory, but it solidified my resolve. I would not allow Eleanor's poison, her obsession with status and bloodlines, to continue infecting this family. I would not let her do to Marco what she had done to so many others. Diminish them, control them, or discard them. I needed a plan. Stepping away from the music and the laughter, I walked out onto the stone terrace overlooking the lake. The cool night air helped to clear my head. The party was a facade. What mattered was what came next. To reveal Eleanor's secret publicly would be to destroy Emily's new marriage with the fallout. The scandal would stain them forever. That was not justice. It was just more destruction. No, justice required something more refined. It required confession. It required repentance. And it required that the debt Eleanor had incurred, not a financial one, but a moral one, be paid. And I knew exactly where the first payment would be demanded. The reception was winding down. Emily and Marco, showered with rice and rose petals, had just departed in a classic car, their laughter trailing behind them in the night. The guests were beginning to leave, their happy farewells echoing across the lawn. I found Eleanor directing the caterers with a crisp, commanding tone. I waited until she had dismissed the manager, and then I stepped forward. "A beautiful party, Eleanor," I said. Her name felt foreign in my mouth. "Thank you, Mother. I think it all went rather well, despite the uninspired choice of groom," she replied, unable to resist a final barb. I ignored it. "After the last guests have gone," I said, my voice low and devoid of all emotion, "you and I are going to the study. We need to discuss an old family account that has an unexpected debt." She frowned, her mind immediately shifting to business, to money, the only language she truly respected. "An account? What are you talking about?" "I manage all the primary trusts." "This one is different," I said, holding her gaze. I let the silence stretch for a moment before I finished. "This is a matter of personal honor. A debt has been incurred, and it is long past time for it to be settled. I use the language of our world, of Arthur's world, the language of accounts, debts, and honor." She understood those words, but the chilling certainty in my voice gave them a new, terrifying meaning she couldn't yet place. I saw a flicker of confusion, of genuine fear, in her eyes for the first time that day. Without another word, I turned and began the slow walk back to the main house, the sound of my footsteps steady on the gravel path. I did not need to look back. I knew she would follow. The performance was over. The trial was about to begin. The house was silent as we entered. The last echoes of the party had faded, leaving a heavy, expectant quiet in their wake. I walked directly to Arthur's study without looking back. The certainty of Eleanor's presence behind me, a cold pressure on my spine. The study was dark, lit only by a sliver of moonlight that cut through the gloom. I did not turn on the overhead light. Instead, I switched on the small brass lamp on Arthur's desk, the same one that had illuminated Jessica's contract just weeks before. The room was transformed into a stage, with the grand mahogany desk at the center of the only pool of light. I sat in Arthur's leather chair, the seat of power, of judgment, and I waited. Eleanor entered, closing the door behind her. The mask of the perfect hostess was gone, replaced by an arrogant impatience. She remained standing, a rigid silhouette in the half-light. "Mother, it is after 1 a.m. It has been a long and exhausting day," she began, her voice clipped. "What is so important? Some misplaced funds? If this is about money, I assure you I can sort it out in the morning." She tried to frame it in her world, a world of numbers and miscalculations, things she could control and correct. I did not say a word. Slowly, with a deliberate movement, I took the folded papers from the pocket of my dress. The sound of the paper unfolding in the silent room was loud, like the snap of a dry twig. I smoothed them out onto the polished surface of the desk, directly in the center of the circle of light. The text messages, the proof of her treachery, lay exposed between us. I looked up at her. "This debt." The blood seemed to drain from Eleanor's face. She took a step forward, her eyes fixed on the pages, and a small sound, a choked gasp, escaped her lips. For a moment she looked unguarded, a child caught in a terrible lie. But it lasted only an instant. The vulnerability was swallowed by a wave of fury. "Where did you get that?" she hissed, her hand reaching out as if to snatch the papers from the desk. "That is mine." "You had no right." "I had every right," I said, my voice as cold and still as the surface of the lake outside. "A grandmother's right to protect her granddaughter. A mother's right to be ashamed of her child." The truth, stark and undeniable, had her cornered. Denial was useless, so she attacked. I did it for this family. She exploded, and the voice I used to begin this memory finally found its place in time, echoing off the dark walls of the study. His blood is not our blood. What I did was to protect the lineage, our name. You of all people should understand that. Grandpa Vance didn't build an empire for it to be handed over to some anonymous architect with good manners and a nice smile. She was panting, her chest heaving, arrogance and prejudice pouring from her like a poison. I would rather see her heartbroken today than see our entire legacy ruined tomorrow. I let her finish. I let the poison fill the air until there was nothing left. Then, in the stillness that followed, I spoke. Your grandfather, I began, my voice dangerously calm, built this empire with his own 2 hands from nothing. He was more like Marco than he will ever be like you, Eleanor. He had integrity. And your father, Arthur, he was a flawed man, God knows, but he believed in strength. He would have despised what you did today, not because of the target, but because of the method, poison and lies, hiding in the shadows. That is not strength. It is the purest form of cowardice. Every word was a stone, and I watched them strike her. You do not speak of legacy, I continued, rising slowly from the chair. You speak of prejudice. You do not speak of protecting Emily. You speak of controlling her. You did not act out of love for our family. You acted out of hatred for a good man you deemed unworthy. You did not honor the Vance name today. You spat it on the ground. I rounded the desk and stopped before her. For the first time in her adult life, I was taller than her, for she seemed to shrink under the weight of my indictment. And then, I delivered the final blow. You have become the worst part of your father, with none of his redeeming qualities. Only the control, the arrogance, and the secrecy. That is what broke her. The mention of her father, the man she both idolized and feared, unmade her. A dry, violent sob shook her frame. The flawless mask of control shattered, and what was left was a bitter, frightened, middle-aged woman, weeping in her dead father's dark study. She doubled over, bracing herself on the desk for support, and the tears she hadn't shed in the church now came freely. I offered no comfort. I watched her in her self-made misery. Justice, I was learning, was a cold and unforgiving thing. I waited until the sobs quieted into shuddering breaths. She could not look at me. It's over, Eleanor, I said softly. The control you thought you had, it's over. Now you will do exactly as I say. Your redemption begins tonight, and the price is high. She lifted her head, her eyes red and swollen, a silent question on her devastated face. You are not just going to apologize, I declared. You're going to fix what you broke. You and your husband will give Marco a wedding gift. You are going to make him a full partner in the Vance construction firm. He will have the status you tried to deny him, the power you think he doesn't deserve, and it will be delivered by your own 2 hands. The silence that followed my pronouncement was heavier than any of the shouting that had come before. It was a silence filled with the deafening sound of a life being irrevocably altered. Eleanor stared at me, her tear-streaked face a mask of utter disbelief. The shock was so profound it seemed to have sobered her from her emotional breakdown, replacing it with a stark, cold horror. A partner? She finally whispered, the words catching in her throat. She shook her head, a slow, dazed motion. Mother, that's absurd. You can't be serious. Her voice regained a sliver of its old argumentative edge. We're talking about the Vance construction firm. It's a multi-million-dollar enterprise. You don't just give a partnership away. It's business. It has nothing to do with this. It has everything to do with this, I countered, my voice unyielding. I did not move from my position, a sentinel of her newfound conscience. You seem to believe this family's legacy is a matter of finance. You believe power and status are the only currencies that matter. Very well. We will speak in a language you understand. I stepped closer, my gaze boring into hers. You tried to ruin a man because you deemed him unworthy of our name. Therefore, you will be the one to make his name inseparable from ours. You tried to attack his honor, so you will be the one to publicly bestow upon him an honor so great it can never be questioned again. You will give him the one thing you value most, not just money, Eleanor, but a seat at the table. Your table. The fight in her eyes began to flicker and die, replaced by a desperate pleading. But Richard, my husband, he would never agree. It's his family's business, too. I can't just... You can, I interrupted, my tone leaving no room for negotiation. And you will, because the alternative is unthinkable for you. I still have these papers. I gestured to the text messages on the desk. This is your choice, and it is the only one you will get. Either you begin the process of healing this family through an act of profound restitution, or I walk out of this room, and I take these papers to Emily and Marco on their honeymoon. I will let them see exactly what kind of mother and grandmother they have, and when they understand, I will take this evidence to the board of directors. I wonder how they would feel about a senior partner who engages in such sabotage. Your reputation, your position, your entire world, Eleanor. It all rests on the choice you make in the next minute. The last of her resistance crumbled. It was a complete and total surrender. She looked down at her hands, which were trembling, and nodded, a barely perceptible motion. The great, powerful Eleanor Vance, who had orchestrated the lives of so many, was now utterly broken, cornered by her own mother in her father's study. I felt no triumph, only a deep, aching sadness for the woman my daughter had become and for the difficult road that lay ahead. "Good," I said, my voice softening slightly, shifting from prosecutor to director. "Now here is what you are going to do. You are going to leave this house. You are going to go home to your husband." She looked up, her eyes wide with a new kind of fear. "You will wake him up," I continued, spelling out each step with cold precision. "You will sit him down, and you will confess everything. Not a managed version of the story, Eleanor. Every sordid detail. The plan, the photographer, the lies, the anonymous delivery. You will tell him what you did to your own child, and why you did it. You will not spare yourself." Her face was ashen. The thought of confessing this moral failing to her husband, a man whose respect she commanded, was clearly a terror beyond anything she had imagined. "And when you are finished," I went on, "you will tell him what your penance is. You will explain the gift you must give to Marco, and you will gain his agreement. Richard is a practical man. He will understand the alternative." I walked back to the desk and began to fold the papers, my movements slow and deliberate. "You will call me at 9:00 in the morning." I expect to hear that it is done. I did not offer her a ride home. I did not offer her a comforting word. I simply stood by the door and waited for her to leave. She picked up her expensive handbag from the floor, a meaningless accessory now, and walked out of the room like a ghost. Her shoulders slumped in defeat. I listened to her footsteps fade down the long hall, followed by the soft, final click of the front door closing. I was alone again in the dark study. The scent of old leather and my husband's secrets thick in the air. I had won the battle. But as I stood there in the profound silence of the great house, I knew a new, uncertain chapter had just begun. I had sent my daughter on a mission that could either be the first step toward her redemption, or one that could shatter her own marriage completely. And I would not know the answer until the morning. Sleep did not come to me that night. I sat in a large armchair by the window in my bedroom, watching the moon make its slow, silent journey across the sky. The great house was still, but for me it was filled with the echoes of the night. Eleanor's furious justifications, her broken sobs, and the cold, final click of the front door as she left. Had I done the right thing? The question circled my mind, relentless. But every time it came, the image of Emily and Marco at the altar, their faces so full of hope and trust, answered it for me. This was not about revenge. It was not even about punishment. It was about resetting the scales. It was about ensuring that the goodness Marco had brought into our family was not devoured by the darkness that already resided there. When dawn broke, painting the sky in soft shades of rose and gold, I felt a grim resolve settle over me. I had set the pieces in motion. Now I had to see the game through to its end. The morning was a study in suspense. I made my coffee, the familiar ritual a small anchor in the churning sea of my thoughts. I walked through the gardens where workmen were already beginning to dismantle the marquee, taking down the beautiful lie of the previous day, piece by piece. The air was crisp and clean, a new day. I wondered if it would be a day of ruin or of rebuilding. I sat in the kitchen, the old grandfather clock in the hall ticking away the minutes. 8:45, 8:50. Each tick was a drumbeat, counting down to the appointed hour. Had Eleanor found the courage? Or had her pride, even in its shattered state, refused to yield? Had her husband, a man I knew to be decent but passive, stood by her or recoiled from her confession? At precisely 9:00, the telephone rang. I picked it up on the second ring, my hand steady. "Hello, Eleanor." There was a pause on the other end, a space of silence so empty it felt like a void. When she finally spoke, her voice was unrecognizable. The crisp, commanding cadence was gone, replaced by a tone that was flat, hollow, and utterly broken. "I did it," she said, just 2 words, devoid of any emotion. "Tell me," I commanded, my own voice quiet but firm. I heard her take a ragged breath. "I went home. Richard was asleep. I woke him up. And I told him." "I told him everything, Mother. From the beginning, the idea, the hiring of that man, the woman, the photographs, everything." Her voice cracked on the last word. I have never seen him look at me like that. It wasn't anger. It was disgust, as if he was seeing a complete stranger, a monster he had been sleeping next to for 30 years. I remained silent, letting her speak. "He didn't yell," she continued, her voice a monotone of despair. "He just got out of bed, went to the closet, and packed a bag. He said he needed to breathe air that wasn't poisoned with deceit. He said he didn't know the woman standing in front of him." My heart, which had been so hard and resolute, felt a pang of something I did not want to feel. "Pity. And the partnership?" I asked, forcing myself to stay on course. "He stopped at the door," Eleanor said, her voice barely a whisper. "He looked at me and he said, 'The family is already rotten, Eleanor. If this is the price to keep the scandal from touching Emily, then pay it. Give the boy the partnership, but know that you are just papering over the cracks.' Then he said he wouldn't be coming back. He walked out. 'He's gone, Mother.' She said nothing else. I said nothing. The line was filled with the sound of her quiet, desolate weeping. She had done as I commanded. She had confessed, and the truth had cost her everything. My victory felt ashen in my mouth. I had demanded justice, and in doing so, I had detonated my own daughter's life. The price for her redemption was her marriage. "Eleanor," I said, my voice softer now. "Where are you?" "I'm at home," she whispered. In the dark." I closed my eyes. The judge's work was done. Now the mother's work had to begin. My righteous anger had burned itself out, leaving behind the complex, messy reality of a broken family that I was now responsible for. "Don't move," I said. "I'm coming over." I hung up the phone. The morning sun streamed into my kitchen, bright and unforgiving. I had won. Eleanor was broken. The partnership for Marco was secured, and my granddaughter's marriage was safe from the immediate threat. But as I picked up my car keys from the hook by the door, I felt no sense of triumph. I felt only the immense, crushing weight of what was to come. I had set out to teach my daughter a lesson, but now I had to help her survive it. The drive to Eleanor's home in the aerial neighborhood was quiet, the familiar tree-lined streets of Pelotas feeling alien in the bright morning light. The city was moving on, blissfully unaware of the private earthquake that had fractured its most prominent family. Eleanor's house, a grand, modern structure of glass and white stone, had always seemed to me a sterile showcase of her success. Today, it looked like a mausoleum. I used my own key to let myself in. The air inside was cold and still, the heavy silk curtains drawn against the morning sun, plunging the grand foyer into a gloomy twilight. The silence was absolute, the kind that feels heavier than sound. It was the silence of a house in mourning. I found her in the formal living room, a space so perfectly curated it was rarely ever used. She was sitting on a pristine white sofa, still wearing the expensive, elegant dress from the wedding. It was now rumpled, a costume from a play that had ended disastrously. Her hair, usually so impeccably styled, was coming undone, and her face was pale and bare. An untouched glass of whiskey sat on the marble coffee table before her, its amber liquid catching the faint light. She looked like a queen deposed, left alone in the throne room after the sacking of her own castle. She didn't seem to notice me until I was standing directly in front of her. She looked up, her eyes empty and hollow. They were not the eyes of my arrogant, controlling daughter. They were the eyes of a stranger. "He never raised his voice," she whispered, her voice a dry rasp. That was the worst part. He just listened. I told him everything, just as you said, and he just listened. When I was done, he looked at me for the longest time, and then he said, "Who are you, Eleanor?" He said it like a genuine question. I did not sit down. I remained standing, a pillar in the wreckage she had created. He said that the woman he married would have been horrified by what I'd done, that she valued kindness and decency. He asked me when she had died. She stared blankly at the far wall. He packed his things and I just watched. He didn't forget anything. It was all very methodical, like he was closing an account. A spark of her old self flickered to life, a small hot coal of resentment in the ashes of her despair. She finally turned her gaze to me. "Are you happy now, Mother? You wanted to teach me a lesson. Consider it taught. My life is over. My husband is gone. You've destroyed me." "No," I said, my voice quiet but firm, cutting through her self-pity. "I have not destroyed you. Your actions have. Your life is not over. Your illusions are. The illusion that you could control everyone in this family. The illusion that our name made you superior. The illusion that your cruelty would have no price. All of that is gone now, yes. It has been burned away. What you choose to build in its place, that will be your life." I let the words hang in the silent room. This was the cold, hard truth of her situation. This was not the end. This was the beginning of her penance, and it would be long and arduous. "This is the first day of your redemption, Eleanor," I continued. "And redemption requires action, not just tears. The pain you feel now, it is the poison leaving your system. Let it!" I walked over to the heavy curtains and pulled one of them back with a decisive motion. Bright, unforgiving sunlight flooded the room, making Eleanor flinch and shield her eyes. "The first step is done. Richard has agreed. The next step begins now." She looked at me, blinking in the sudden light, a silent question in her exhausted eyes. "At noon today," I instructed, my tone leaving no room for argument, "you will call Mr. Montero, your father's old lawyer. You will schedule an emergency meeting for tomorrow morning. You are to inform him that you and Richard have decided to amend the partnership agreement of the Vance firm. You will tell him that you are bringing on a new junior partner as a wedding gift to your new son-in-law." I paused, letting the weight of the concrete action settle upon her. This was no longer a hypothetical punishment discussed in the dead of night. This was a phone call. This was a meeting. This was real. "You will tell him the name of the new partner is Marco Rossi." I turned and walked towards the door. My work here, for now, was done. I stopped at the threshold and looked back at her. She was still sitting on the sofa, bathed in that harsh shaft of sunlight, her gaze fixed on the telephone on the side table. It was no longer an innocent object. It was the next instrument of her atonement, the tool she would have to use to begin to undo the damage she had wrought. And I knew, as I closed the door quietly behind me, that it would be the hardest phone call of her life. The drive back from Eleanor's house was a journey through a landscape of my own making. I had passed a sentence, and in doing so, had become the architect of my family's immediate painful future. I felt the weight of it in my bones, a heavy, unyielding burden. There was no joy in this, only the grim necessity of a surgeon cutting away a sickness. I spent the rest of the morning in a state of suspended animation. I did not call Eleanor. I did not pace. I sat in the parlor, a book open but unread in my lap, and I waited. I had given an order. The choice to obey and to begin her long climb back to grace was hers alone. The grandfather clock in the hall struck noon, each chime a slow, deliberate heartbeat. The silence that followed was absolute. At 12:30, the phone rang. It was not Eleanor. The voice on the other end was reedy and familiar, laced with a professional concern that had served my family for 40 years. It was Alberto Montero, my late husband's lawyer and executor of the family trust. "Mary," he began, his tone cautious. "Forgive me for calling you directly, but I've just had a most unusual call from Eleanor." "I am aware of it, Alberto," I said, my voice calm and steady. Well, she didn't sound like herself. She instructed me to begin the process of restructuring the Vance firm's core partnership, to include her new son-in-law, Marco Rossi. "Mary, a full partnership is a monumental gift. I felt I had to confirm with you that this is a decision being made with a clear mind." "Our minds have never been clearer," I replied, cutting off his gentle inquiry. "It is a family decision. You have your instructions. Please proceed." There was a moment of stunned silence on his end. "Of course, Mary," he finally said. "As you wish." I hung up the phone. The first ripple had reached the shore. Eleanor had obeyed. A small, cold knot of relief tightened in my chest. She had taken the first step. The next call came 3 hours later. This one was not cautious. It was a roar. "Mother!" David's voice exploded through the phone so loud I had to pull the receiver away from my ear. "What in God's name is this I hear from Montero?" "Have you lost your mind? A full partnership for the wedding singer. You're diluting my shares. My children's inheritance. For what?" A thank you gift for marrying a girl who should have done better? David, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. Lower your voice. I will not lower my voice. I am on my way over. We are going to talk about this. The line went dead. 20 minutes later, his car screeched to a halt in my driveway. He burst through the front door without knocking, his face flushed with rage. He was the picture of his father in a temper, all bluster and entitlement. Explain this, he demanded, standing in the middle of my parlor. Explain this insanity. Eleanor must be having a breakdown and you're just enabling her. This is the single worst business decision this family has made in 50 years. Sit down, David, I said. It was not a request. He hesitated, then reluctantly sank into the armchair opposite me, perched on the edge as if ready to spring. This is not a business decision, I stated, my eyes locked on his. It is a family matter, and it is not open for discussion. Not open for discussion? He scoffed. It's my money you're giving away. My children's future! It most certainly is open for discussion. Marco knows nothing about construction, about finance, about our business. He's an artist, a nobody. He is Emily's husband, I said, each word a chip of ice. And he is now a part of this family. This is his welcome. It is a gesture of solidarity. You will treat it as such. A gesture? Mother, this is a multi-million-dollar gesture. There has to be a reason. Tell me the reason. He pushed, leaning forward, his eyes narrowed. This was the critical moment. I could not tell him the truth. The secret of Eleanor's treachery had to be contained. I held his gaze, my expression unreadable. The reason, I said slowly, is not your concern. Your only concern is to accept it with grace. You will not speak of this to your sister in anger. You will not, under any circumstances, mention this to Emily or Marco. You will attend a family dinner here on Sunday evening, where we will all welcome him properly. You will raise a glass, you will smile, and you will make him feel a part of this family. That is what will happen. Is that clear? He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing silently. He was searching my face for a crack, a hint of weakness or sentimentality he could exploit. He found none. He found only a will of iron he had not seen in his mother in many years. He saw the woman who had stood by his powerful, difficult father and had never once bent. He slumped back in his chair, the fight draining out of him, replaced by a sullen, resentful confusion. Fine, he muttered, running a hand through his hair. Fine, but I don't understand. I don't understand any of this. You don't have to, I said, standing to signal the end of the meeting. You only have to obey. He left without another word, the fury in his eyes now banked to a low, simmering coal. I'd put out the first fire, but I knew the cost. I had demanded obedience where I could not offer truth. And as I stood alone in the quiet parlor, I felt the strain of it all. Holding a family together with secrets and steel was a heavy, exhausting burden, and I knew the dinner on Sunday would be the greatest test of it yet. The days between that terrible morning and the following Sunday were the longest of my life. The great house was silent, but my mind was not. I had thrown a stone into the placid, deceptive waters of my family, and I could only wait for the final waves to break upon the shore. I spoke to Eleanor only once, a brief, functional call to confirm the dinner. Her voice was thin but steady. She was holding on to the wreckage, as I had commanded. Sunday arrived, cloaked in a brilliant, cloudless sky that felt like a mockery of the storm brewing within my home. One by one they came. David and his wife, their smiles as brittle as spun glass. Samuel, ever the follower, sensing the tension but not its source. And Eleanor. She arrived alone. Richard's absence was a physical presence in the room, a ghost at the feast that no one dared acknowledge. She was pale but composed, dressed in a simple, elegant navy dress. The armor of her pride was gone, replaced by a quiet, fragile dignity I had never seen in her before. And then came Emily and Marco. They entered the room like a ray of sunshine, bringing with them the unburdened joy of their new life together. They were tanned from a few days away at the coast, their laughter filling the tense silence in the parlor. They saw only a family gathered to celebrate them, and their innocence was a painful, beautiful thing to behold. Dinner was an exercise in masterful pretense. We spoke of the weather, of business, of trivial matters. David was sullen, pushing food around his plate. Eleanor ate little, speaking only when spoken to, her eyes often fixed on her daughter's happy face. I steered the conversation, a grim captain navigating a ship through a sea of minds. desperately keeping it afloat until we reached our destination. Finally, the dessert plates were cleared. The coffee was poured. The moment had come. I caught Eleanor's eye across the long mahogany table, and I gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. She took a slow, steadying breath and rose from her chair. A hush fell over the table. Even Emily and Marco turned to her, their expressions curious. I wanted to say a few words, Eleanor began, her voice low but clear. Her hands, resting on the back of her chair, were clenched so tightly her knuckles were white. This past week has been a momentous one for our family. We have celebrated a beautiful union, and we have all been so blessed to witness the joy between Emily and Marco. She paused, and her eyes met mine. I saw a flicker of the old fear, but also a flicker of something new, resolve. A family, like a business, must evolve to survive, she continued, turning her gaze to Marco. It must be strong enough to recognize new value, to embrace a future that is different from its past. We have not always been good at that. I have not always been good at that. A small gasp escaped David's wife, but David shot her a look that silenced her. Marco, Eleanor said, and now she looked directly at him, her voice softening. When you love someone, you want what is best for them. Sometimes in our arrogance we think we know what that is. But true love, true family, is about recognizing the good that is already there. You are a man of integrity, of kindness, and of great character. You have made my daughter happier than I have ever seen her. That in itself is a gift to us all, her voice cracked, just for a moment, as she looked at a beaming Emily. She took another breath and stood a little taller. And so, as a symbol of that, and as a formal welcome into the Vance family, your father-in-law and I have decided to give you a proper wedding gift. We have instructed our lawyers to make you a full partner in the Vance construction firm. The silence that followed was absolute. Emily's jaw dropped, her eyes filling with tears of stunned joy. Marco looked utterly bewildered, as if he had misheard. David stared into his coffee cup as if it held the secrets to the universe, his face a mask of stone. Eleanor, Marco stammered, shaking his head. I can't possibly accept that. You can, and you will, Eleanor said, a faint, sad smile touching her lips. It is not just a gift. It is your rightful place. Welcome to the family, Marco. Truly, she raised her glass. To Emily and Marco, to the future. Slowly, we all stood and raised our glasses, the chorus of "To Emily and Marco" echoing in the room. In that moment, under the warm light of the chandelier, we almost looked like a happy family. The performance was complete. The debt was paid. Later, as I stood alone in the quiet hall after they had all departed, I replayed the memory of that day. On my granddaughter's wedding day, I discovered my daughter's secret plan to destroy it. The memory felt like a lifetime ago. I had won. I had saved my granddaughter's happiness and set my daughter on a painful but necessary path. But I had also seen a marriage crumble and planted a seed of permanent resentment in my son. I had held my family together, but I had done so with secrets and steel. And as I turned off the lights, one by one, I understood the profound, bittersweet truth of being a matriarch. Sometimes, to keep the house standing, you must be willing to tear down a room. And you must be strong enough to live in the silence that follows.